So what happens if they just say, okay, we're going to reverse our mandate on Chinese-made EVs, convince them to actually make them in Canada, and then those Canadian workers just slide on over to making those Chinese EVs?
The media has stooped to a new level of desperation. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today, we're seeing headlines coming from a former broadcaster hinting at the idea that some conservatives are going to be crossing the aisle to the Liberals. What a joke. We got a lot of talk here on whether an election is coming up. Is this the Liberals just stirring things up, trying to rally some support, or is there a strategy here? You got a whole bunch of other stuff here. Let's jump into this. Start this one off. We got some polling data. This comes from Shreya Teest here. Latest Ontario Abacus poll modeled out. This is an absolute wipeout. The PC's Doug Ford's party here, plus 25 up to 105 seats. The NDP dropping 16 seats. The Liberals dropping 9 seats. This is a complete blowout. And as you see the original data here, 51% for the PCs and 25% Liberals, 15% NDP. Wow. Something to note about this, though, federally, these numbers don't transfer. A bunch of these people will jump over to the Liberals. That seems to always happen. Moving ahead, we've got this one here. Inflation jumps to 2.4% in September thanks to gas and grocery costs. Is this the elbows up they've been talking about? Got this one here. The Auditor General has found that the CRA call centers are slow to answer and often inaccurate. CRA agents gave accurate answers only 17% of the time. This is deplorable. As Senator Leo Husako says, in what other job can you be right only 17% of the time and not be fired? This is such a deplorable situation. We've got Aaron Gunn posting this. CRA has never been great, but under the Liberals, it's been an absolute train wreck. Millions of calls go unanswered. 83% of the information given out has been wrong. This despite a 50% increase in their budget and thousands of new employees. How do you give more money and get worse results? I guess, I don't know. That's a Liberal mystery. We got Doug Ford with this one. He's threatening to sue General Motors after they pulled the plug on the Ingersoll Bright Drop delivery vans.
This is the reason.
Was this a bad bet, do you think, on Ontario's part to put money into this General Motors facility? And how do you get that money back?
If they breach a contract, we're going to sue them. Simple as that. And he knows that. They breached a contract, and we're going to make sure that we get another vehicle in that area. This is the reason.
Yeah, that's not happening, Doug. He's not doing either of those things. Doug Ford's not going to sue, and they're not going to get another vehicle in that area. Yet somehow he's dominating in the polls. I guess it's just incompetence is all the only options in Ontario. They did not breach a contract. They agreed to make EV delivery trucks. There's no sales if they stay. Here's what's going to happen. The government is going to agree to purchase the vans they produce at an inflated rate. And what will they do with them? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this really breaches a contract. There's no sales. That's it. The people don't want to buy those vans, so there's no reason to produce them. Moving ahead, we've got Stephen Guilbeault telling us that the CBC is unbiased media. And you're going to see here, the media is getting out of control with the stuff they're trying to push. Like, they are so terrified of Pierre Poilievre.
As you know, we committed to invest more in the public broadcaster, and we believe that those additional resources will help them make sure that Canadians have access to more information, non-biased information, and more local news across the country.
Unbiased media, right. So what are we seeing in the media? We got this one from CTV. Liberals, Greens, and NDP call on Poilievre to apologize over RCMP comments. Get real. First, why would he apologize for something that is true? Justin Trudeau should be investigated. The cops did not do it. We also have this one coming from Peter Mansbridge. You know, I grew up with Peter Mansbridge. It is really just a shame to see him basically be a Liberal shill. Does Poilievre need to worry about some MPs crossing the aisle to join the Liberals? What a load of crap. Are some Conservatives thinking about joining the Liberals? Yeah, right. This is the kind of junk they're pushing out into the media. These are nonsense topics. You could just make up something and ask it as a question and get away with it. Is Mark Carney thinking of resigning because he's terrified of Pierre Poilievre? And not based in any reality, but of course they have a little podcast here where they're talking about it. So suddenly it's a topic somebody's talking about. As Mario is replying here, thank you, Peter. This actually put a smile on my face. This is what desperation looks like. Carney is sinking. He is failing. He failed Canadians. So when I see National Enquirer Yeti headlines like this, all I smell is victory. It reeks of desperation. In a year, you'll be referring to Pierre as Prime Minister. Ouch. Let's take a brief listen to what Mansbridge, and he brought on Rob Russo and Althea Raj. They're regulars on CBC. Before we get to the topic at hand, just listen to this, talking about the Pierre Poilievre RCMP situation.
Comments, he suggests that Justin Trudeau should have been jailed for accepting the trip to the Aga Khan's island, which he argued, the Prime Minister at the time argued, that he went to the Aga Khan because that's a family friend. He was a pallbearer at his father's funeral, but there were ethical challenges with that, and he got a slap on the wrist essentially for that trip. But
Why is she laughing? Yeah, there was ethical problems with that. That's why he should be investigated. He should be charged for that.
But Pierre Poilievre is saying that Justin Trudeau should have gone to jail for that, and possibly should also have been charged criminally in the SNC-Lavalin case, which the RCMP investigated.
No, they did not.
I have never heard of any investigation where there wasn't any attempt. Was there at least an attempt to interview Justin Trudeau? Yes or no? No.
Pierre Poilievre, the man who wants to be prime minister, is suggesting that actually there was more than enough there, and that the RCMP leadership acted in a despicable manner by not following through. Those comments, which sound very Trump-like in terms of like jailing your opponents and going after them,
Why is it Trump-like to jail someone who's committed a crime? Justin Trudeau clearly has some violations there. They should be investigated, and if he's prosecuted, we should be throwing his butt in the slammer. There's nothing Trumpian about that. That's common sense.
a lot of alarm bells with conservatives like Dimitri Soudis, and he is still a conservative despite his
So they're just crutching on this Dimitri Soudis, who wrote this scathing op-ed in the Toronto Star. It's a load of garbage. Dimitri's one of these other washed up losers who probably got approached by one of these mainstream media to write an article to make some cash. Maybe he just had a chip on his shoulder from the past and wanted to try to stick it to Poilievre. Who knows?
You suggested there a few moments ago that, the possibility of crossing the floor, joining the Liberals, I assume. I've heard that a couple of times in the last week, that there are 4 or 5 Conservatives at least having some kind of discussions, very informal, but discussions nevertheless, about doing something like that.
This is a bunch of bullcrap. Either name the people or this is just a load of propaganda.
Are you hearing anything about this, Rob? Is there anything
certainly
like this?
there have been probes made. Conservatives feel comfortable with what this guy is doing.
Come on, guys. Carney is ripping off Canadians. Conservatives are not okay with that. The lies they're pushing here are just unbelievable. You think conservatives are okay with this? This many rampant conflicts of interest? No. Do you think conservatives are okay with a $100 billion deficit? No. Nobody is okay with this. Mark Carney's web of connections, his ridiculous list of stocks he's invested in, the fact he can still own Brookfield shares and his investments in Global Transition Fund and all this kind of stuff. This does not sit well with the conservatives at all. This is such a desperate attempt to try to create some narrative out of nothing. That's what this is. It's utter desperation, as Mario pointed out. This is what desperation looks like. Carney is sinking, and they're terrified. So get Peter Mansbridge and a couple of these washed up reporters on here to spread some rumors. Like, you could just make up anything. But I mean, that's how this works. They just make up some topic, they talk about it on a podcast, and then suddenly it's a piece of media that people are talking about. We got rumors. Somebody told me something. This is bull crap. This is not journalism. This is propaganda.
Some of them are going on, open line shows, podcasts like this, and actually expressing that kind of support.
They are? Which podcasts? What conservatives have gone out and said, you know what, I'm thinking of joining the Liberal Party and crossing the floor? Name one podcast, name one event, name one show, name anything. Where is it? It doesn't exist.
Those in the benches behind Mr. Poilievre, while supporting conservative causes, also are saying that they are supportive of some of what the Prime Minister is doing.
Well, obviously, because they brought the carbon tax down to 0. They didn't cut it, but they brought it down. That was Pierre's big push against Justin Trudeau. So yeah, the whole bench should be in favor of that.
It hasn't gone unnoted. My understanding is that these probes went out shortly after the election, and then some discussions were had, but they were put aside once we got into the nitty-gritty of negotiations with the United States and Donald Trump's administration.
This is all propaganda bullcrap. Well, this just in, I'm hearing that some Liberals, they want to cross the floor to the Conservatives. There's rumors, there's probes that went out, and a bunch of the Liberals, nearly half the bench, wants to cross the floor to the Conservatives. That's what I'm hearing from inside the room. Like, give me a break. There's no low these guys won't stoop to.
To get to a majority number, they're 3 short of majority government now, 172 seats. And they would do that via the New Democrats. It is a bit of a twist on what a lot of people were expecting as to where the ardor and where the woo would be pitched in these kinds of discussions. And it tells you a little bit about Mark Carney's style of governing. If conservatives feel comfortable about even contemplating that, and doing it quietly. It tells you a little bit about where Mark Carney is. And it also tells you, I think, that there is an opportunity for a pragmatic New Democratic Party to take advantage of this.
He mentioned they would need to get to a majority. They would think it would be the NDP who want to do it, but now there's conservatives considering that to get Carney as majority. Yeah, right. You know what happened if 3 conservatives went over to the Liberals? It would be the end of their political career because they would be absolutely hated in their own constituency. The next election, they would be gone. And not only that, they would be heckled and humiliated and absolutely hated in their communities, probably for the rest of eternity. That's never going to happen. It's one thing if the NDP slide over to the Liberals, and not even that's happening. This is a load of bullcrap. It's interesting. This lines up with the exact timing that we're hearing all this talk about. Is there going to be an election? Who's going to support the budget? The Bloc came out and the Conservatives come out and said, yeah, we're not supporting this budget, this $100 billion blowout or whatever it'll end up being. The NDP are still floating in the air.
We would obviously, reluctantly, because we don't think Canadians want an election, but election there will be.
An election there will be. That's Government House Leader Steve McKinnon saying he's worried about support for the upcoming federal budget while criticizing some opposition parties for dismissing the budget before seeing it. He also called budget demands from the Conservatives, quote, ludicrous. Opposition parties contend, though, the minister is flipping the script and that the onus is instead on the government to secure support, not the other way around. Could Canadians really be headed to the polls sometime soon? Let's bring in our front bench.
So right off the bat, I'm going to say no. I think there'll be an election in June next year. That's what I think. Could it be by Christmas? Yeah, maybe. If the NDP say no, we're not going to do it. I mean, really, the NDP, even if we went to election and they didn't do any campaigning, they'd probably get a couple of seats. So it's not really a lot in it for them, but who knows? All they have to do is Carney to throw them a single bone. It doesn't have to be much, right? They don't have any power. All they really want is official party status, so they're actually seen during the House of Commons sessions, because right now they're at the end, so they're basically irrelevant. So Carney wouldn't have to give up much to make a quick deal with them. But then, once again, they don't want to tie their wagon to the Liberals, although could they argue, well, it's not Trudeau, it's the Carney Liberals, it's the new government, guys, trust us. We're just going to do this until we get our leader in place. So they might be able to play to their base like that.
It was a very interesting comment from the minister from a political perspective, because it's a lot of sort of pre-budget political positioning, very much an effort to put the onus on the opposition moving forward, which I thought was, certainly something that stood out to me. What do you think he was trying to do there?
Well, it strikes me that he says he's worried, but he's not really worried, because I think if you look at, where the Liberal government is sitting right now in relation to the opposition, they're looking pretty good if an election were to be called. Look, I don't think that the government does want one, because I don't think the public wants one, right? We can't have elections every 6 months in this country. But I think, the Liberals are positioning themselves as the party that is probably the most ready and the most likely to benefit from an election right now. If you look at, the NDP are leaderless, they're going through a leadership vote at some point. The Conservatives are sort of struggling to punch through. We have controversies with Pierre Poilievre attacking the National Police Force, essentially.
No, that's not what's happening here. This is a bad take. I think every other party, aside from the Liberals, are set to benefit right now. If we look at the aggregate of polling data, we're seeing that it's neck and neck now. The Conservatives keep popping up above here, and the only polling data that really keeps pushing the Liberals up higher is Nanos data, which is always more liberal. So really, the Conservatives are leading right now. We've seen it in 4 polls in a row, aside from the, I think, 2 Nanos polls that came out. And with that, you can see an uptick here from the NDP. They were down at 7.9. Now they're up to 8.5%. So they'll be grabbing a couple more seats if an election is held right now.
Kathleen, what do you think the positioning is all about at this point? So we're just over 2 weeks away from the tabling of the budget.
Yeah, well, Laura just stole my line, because honestly, I love a good game of election chicken stare off, and that's exactly what's happening. And I actually would say with the New Democrats, and this is the correction, Laura, is just that, honestly, we got nothing left to lose. Like, bring on the election. We might not be able to have the money to run a big campaign, but truthfully, honestly, we have nowhere to go but up. We've already lost party status.
I would ask, though, Larissa, on the sort of opening that might exist, sort of bridging what Kathleen's saying with the budget talk. Do you think that will be the case come the budget? And I ask because of the relative positioning of both the Conservatives of the Bloc. Like you heard from the minister, the Bloc was the first out of the gate, that actually they've seen nothing to be able to support the budget. Then you have the Conservatives laying out a list of demands, which we know there is, particularly where the size of the deficit is, that they want it to be no greater, I think, than $42 billion. Like, that's not going to happen. So that leaves the NDP. And does that mean something different for the budget than maybe the rhetoric around the Carney government would lead us to believe?
Yeah, so like leading into the budget, we heard the Prime Minister say both that it was going to be an austerity budget, he said it in French, and that he said once it's going to have generational investment. And when he said that, my ears sort of perked up and I thought, God, that sounds expensive. I don't think the NDP can afford an election. The Conservatives certainly can. I mean, that's the one marker that the Conservatives always outperform the Liberals. They always raise more money. And that's the number one kind of, are we ready to go? We're organized and we raise money. So
something to note on that, Mark Carney recently had a fundraiser. So I've got it here. This is October 16th, $1,750 per person to have an evening with Mark Carney. So Carney out in Brampton here fundraising. Are we going to an election soon? Maybe this is just preemptive for an election middle of the year next year. I still don't think it's happening here in the next month or so, but never know.
Conservatives could go to an election. The House leader was saying, the opposition's not reading the room. They're not reading the mood of the people. I think he's not reading the room. If he's going to start throwing this out there, we've had, I think, 5 provincial elections in the last year. We had some major cities have elections. Quebec's going to an election next year. Canadians are tired. They want stability. Mark Carney promised stability, promised he was going to take on Donald Trump. He promised our economic indicators were going to, get better and turn the tide. He hasn't delivered on those things. I think he's got a massive task in front of him with this budget to deliver on the things he promised Canadians he was going to deliver on. Food prices are up, rent is up, inflation is up, and he's got a lot to tackle in this budget. And I agree. I don't know if it's going to be a spending or austerity budget, but he needs the NDP support.
Louis, how do you think this is going to play out?
Well, I've got some breaking news from your viewers, Vashi, and that there will be no election this fall over the budget. I mean, let's be serious here. If you take a step back, though, I think the more important question that we need to look at, or at least the Liberals have to look at, is as to whether they're able to leverage this budget to sort of get a better hold of the general political narrative right now in Ottawa, because we know over the last 6 months that narrative has not been very positive for them. And, we were promised big things, and they seem to be under-delivering, especially on the U.S. file. Mark Carney said he would stand up to Donald Trump. There would be no tariffs, and this would be wrapped up in a couple of weeks. That has not happened. So I think there's an opportunity here for the Liberals to be able to leverage this budget, and maybe, who knows, there are rumors now that there may be a deal on aluminum, steel, and energy with the United States. You could maybe, combine that into a 1-2 punch, where you've got that deal that's being announced maybe around the Cpac in South Korea next week, and then maybe a couple of days or a week later, you've got the budget where you're able to sort of grab Canadians' attention once again and really sort of provide them with that forward-looking vision to get a handle again on the general narrative, because they don't seem to have a strong handle on that right now.
That's a good take. I mean, that might be what they're doing here. They get a deal, some sort of deal, China and one in Korea or some other nation. The steel, aluminum, or one of those sectoral tariffs goes through with Donald Trump. Then they announce the $100 billion budget and say, hey guys, look what we're doing. We're going to spend some more money, but look at all the deals we're doing, and then go to an election, try to wet the mouths of Canadians to vote for them again. I mean, this might be the dirty tactic why they're delaying this as far as possible. Who knows? I still don't think election's happening anytime soon. It'd still be 6, 7, 8 months out, but you never know with Carney. He's a smart man. He swindled Canadians during the election, lying to Canadians, and then obviously we found out later that he had cut the tariffs during the campaign. So anything's on the table.
I met this morning with the Canadian CEO of GM. I was in conversation with the head of the labor union of Unifor, and I also talked to Doug Ford, and I talked to Vic Fideli. We will make sure that we fight for these jobs.
She talked to this person, and she talked to that person, and she talked to this other person, and she talked, and she talked, and they talk, and they talk, and nothing gets done, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are tired of talk. They want their job.
What are your thoughts on how the sort of Stellantis decision and now GM, I know they're not perfectly analogous, but like how big of a challenge is this?
This is crazy, Vashi. I mean, just think back about 18 months, maybe 2 years ago, we were so high on the auto industry in this country. We were literally like going for the fence. Less than 2 years later, the wheels seem to be coming off the cart. Excuse the pun here. I think Pierre Poilievre, and I hate to say this, but I think Pierre Poilievre's got a point there. And, the Carney brand is action, it's focus, it's right now, it's let's get things done. And you've got the industry minister saying that she talked to one person, talked to another and whatnot. This is going to be very, very tough. The auto industry is going through a crisis moment. Obviously, we've heard about this potential deal with the United States, which does not include the auto industry, by the way. And when Melanie Joly talks about having, these contractual obligations with these companies whereby they need to guarantee, or they took undertakings to guarantee a certain number of jobs in Canada, that's all well and good. But you know how these things work. The company bails, goes to the United States, people lose their jobs, and then you go to court over the obligations and the contracts, and that can take for years. And so politically speaking, it's very, very difficult to see the upside on this when the industry is going through a crisis, particularly in Ontario, but also here in Quebec.
It is amazing how much of our money they've dumped into that industry, and now it's going belly up here in a matter of a couple of months here.
Larissa, what do you think about that?
I agree. When I saw the minister's scrum earlier with reporters and then her performance in question period, her answer was, I talked to this guy, I talked to that guy. Nothing's getting done. I saw Lisa Raitt on the show yesterday, and she said something that really stuck with me, and that was that Donald Trump doesn't want any car made in Canada. Any car that's sold to Americans, he doesn't want any part of it made in Canada. And when Stellantis made their announcement last week, I actually watched the U.S. news of the Stellantis CEO celebrating that investment in the States. And he said a really also glaring thing. He said, our number one priority is the United States. That's her number one market. This is the biggest investment they've ever made in the U.S. And that's not going to change. And once that investment goes there, it's not coming back. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg for our auto industry. And, frankly, the government's going to be scrambling here because they don't know what they're going to do.
We need to pivot and pivot quickly. We should be cranking up some new oil and gas pipelines immediately across the country, pull up a bunch of those proposals, all the ones that were close to being done, and start firing those up. We should be exporting our oil around the world. That way our country will never be hurting again.
The story is far from written. The company still has many different ways to be squeezed, whether it comes from the Minister of Industry or not through her suit. I think, sure, maybe that's unlikely. There's still consumer power, which I can talk about it ad nauseum, but actually what I want to focus on is the one card that the government still has to play. And they can just open up Canadian manufacturing plants and the footprint that exists to Chinese manufacturers. It either is going to be cars made in the States or cars made in China. So what happens if they just say, okay, we're going to reverse our mandate on Chinese-made EVs, convince them to actually make them in Canada, and then those Canadian workers just slide on over to making those Chinese EVs, but in Canada, made by Canadian workers. I mean, the company still is going to be squeezed. And I remind you that it was just a bit more than 15 years ago, that every Canadian in Canada held a GoFundMe campaign for Chrysler, Stellantis now called, and gave them $100 out of their own jeans to basically say, hey, we want you to get through this financial crisis. We want to give you a leg up. And so them turning their back on Canada now and moving, as apparently GM is as well today, the news from today, Canadians know that if you want to sell here, you've got to make here. And that means you can't just turn your back on the workers. And if that void is going to be filled by China or some other manufacturer, well, Canadians can vote with their wallet.
The Liberals have another card they can play. Why don't they just steal their land back? Just steal all of Stellantis land. Just steal it back. Isn't that what we're doing now?
You think we've got it bad with Donald Trump right now? Just wait until we start, importing Chinese EVs in Canada. I mean,
it's complex.
Not importing, making them here.
Well,
even that's going to piss off Trump too. This is a powder keg waiting to explode.